Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. Now this is going to be part 2, like the second video in my dealing with tricky situations at camp kind of series that I'm doing. And in this video today I'm going to talk about kind of getting the kids to bed, getting them ready to go to sleep, and just kind of the wind down at the end of the day of what is a really busy and exciting day at camp. Now if you haven't watched my first video in this series, I would recommend going watching that first, because I do like a little intro into what I'm doing with these series, and just the fact that I'm going to kind of give you some tips and some things that have worked for me at camp in dealing with some like trickier situations or situations that you maybe don't know how to handle. But one thing to remember is that you will have a lot of this covered in orientation, but it's just nice to kind of get thinking about some ideas and stuff before you even get to camp. So yeah, like I said, in this video I'm going to talk about getting the kids to sleep, and this is something that is quite hard. It can be really hard because you've got a group of what can be between like 10 and 14 campers. Again, this is based on my camp. Your camp might have more kids, might have less. It's hard, like trying to round up a group of kids at any age, whether they're 6 and 7 years old or they're 15 and 16 years old, and trying to get them to settle down and get to bed and get to sleep. It's a task, but one thing to remember is that you're not ever doing that on your own. So one thing I want to talk about first is that this will vary massively depending on the age group of kids that you have. Now at my camp, for example, we have kids as young as 6 and 7 years old. Their bedtime is around, I want to say between 9 and 9:30. They will have had dinner and then evening activity, go to canteen, and literally be back down towards the bunks by about 9 o'clock, and normally fast asleep by 9:30. Now these kids obviously tire out a lot more than the older kids do. They need to get to bed earlier simply because they're younger. So as a counsellor in a younger division, I found that I was so well rested because I was able to go to sleep once the kids had gone to sleep, and if it was at 9:30, I was getting like a really nice long sleep, even though those kids are getting up a lot earlier. I find my kids used to wake me up at around 6, half 6, just because they had gone to sleep so much earlier and they just wake up earlier naturally. Whereas my group of girls that I had last summer, they were 13 years old, and our curfew was, I want to say 10:30, and we had like lights out at 11, but it could be like 11:30, 12 before the kids are actually settling and getting to bed. So for example, I could be going to sleep at 11:30, 12, but then we would sometimes sleep in a little bit later because those kids were a bit older. So realistically you're kind of getting the same amount of sleep regardless of which age, but just the kind of way that you do like the whole nighttime routine will be slightly different depending on the age group you have. Just slightly touching on what I mentioned in my first video in terms of this, so like I said, go and watch that one first. Nighttime is when things like homesickness and those kind of emotions come up for a lot of the youngest kids. I found when I was putting my kids to bed back when they were like 7 years old, it would be like nighttime could be quite hard because some of these kids were feeling really upset and really missing home, so they were keeping themselves up because they just couldn't sleep and they just needed someone to sit with them. And that's something to bear in mind as well. Whereas obviously with my girls this past year, 13 turning 14 years old, no one really felt like that. No one was going through those kind of emotions, so it was a case of they were kind of getting into bed at 11:30 and just falling asleep as and when they did. My biggest tip with getting the kids to sleep though, and setting kind of a routine, is to make sure you're kind of firm with it from the start of the summer. It's no good kind of, if we have lights out at 11, the lights are going out at 11, not a minute after, not a minute before, because you need to set that routine so that the kids know what time the lights are going off, they need to be in bed by. And I would always say to my girls, look, I don't mind if you want to stay in bed and you want to chat, I've got no problem with that, but it's when you're keeping other people awake and there's other campers trying to go to sleep, that's when it's not really fair. And my girls really respected that. They liked the idea that I wasn't actually saying at 11 o'clock you need to close your eyes and be going to sleep, because I know that that's not a very reasonable thing to say to a group of like 14 girls in a bunk all together who are all friends. But it would definitely be a case of if the bunk was getting quite noisy and the campers were kind of like getting excited and maybe like talking a little bit louder, it would just be a case of, right girls, like just quieten down. Again, I've got no problem if you want to stay up chatting a little bit, but just keep it down so other people can sleep if they need to. And just reminding them that if they stayed up super late, they were just going to be so tired the next day, and normally the kids would all be, they would just put themselves to sleep. They would just kind of go off to their own beds, put their eye masks on, get under the covers and go to sleep naturally. One of my girls actually had some really cool LED lights that we put up all over the bunk, and it was nice to be able to turn the main big lights off and keep the LEDs on, so that some kids that maybe wanted to write letters home after the lights had gone out, or read a book or listen to some music, they could do, and it was just that nice like wind down time without obviously having to have the huge big lights on. So that was something that was really good, and I hope we have some LEDs at camp again this year, because it was just nice and it really helped bring the mood down a little bit, and it slowed everything down and the kids weren't like running around like crazy. I find that if you've got all the lights on, you've got music on, you've got different things going on, it can just get chaotic. So music is another great thing to try and do to kind of like get the kids like getting into like a nighttime routine and actually remembering that they are about to go to sleep. So we would have kind of like spa relaxing music, and I would just put it on a speaker and I would put it on as we got back to the bunk at around 10:30. So as the kids were getting into their pajamas, doing their skincare, brushing their teeth, we had kind of like chill music on, as opposed to like party anthems that some of the kids would try and put on. But it just, obviously everyone gets too excited and then no one is ready to go to sleep in 30 minutes time. So yeah, if you are able to have music in the bunk, that was really, really helpful for us in those situations. And yeah, just to try and like calm everything down. Obviously reminding the kids, some kids obviously they get back from canteen and they've a lot's gone on, there's been loads of exciting things happen at canteen and they just want to sit and talk to their friends, which is again absolutely fine. But just like those gentle reminders, like come on, like let's go and get our teeth brushed, put your pajamas on, carry on this conversation, but let's start to get ready for bed. And one thing you will find is that at the start of the summer, the nights tend to be a little bit later because those excitement levels are just so much higher. Like the first, I want to say 2 or 3 nights at camp, bedtime is late, like it naturally will be, just because these kids haven't been in a bunk together for 10 months. Like it's been a long time. They're excited, they're so happy to be back in a bunk with all their friends. Naturally they're gonna have the giggles, they're going to have a lot to talk about, there's going to be a lot going on. So kind of just accept that those first few nights might naturally be a little bit later, but just kind of being on top of the fact of saying like, right, lights are going off now, like let's just try and keep it down. We've got no problem with you like chatting for a little bit, but let's try and keep it down and get ready to go to bed. And then genuinely by the last few weeks of the summer, the kids are absolutely exhausted. Like think about doing back-to-back full activities of sports and dance and arts and crafts, swimming, different things, waking up at 8 a.m. and sometimes going to sleep at like 11, 12 o'clock and doing it back to back every day for 7 weeks. It's intense. So by the time I want to say like we get to week 5 at camp, everyone is exhausted, like campers and counsellors, everyone is so tired. So I found like a lot of the kids would literally just get straight into bed. They were so tired and they'd be going to sleep very early, much earlier than they were at the start of the summer anyway. Again, another thing to remember is that you're not in this alone. You will have co-counsellors that are on duty alongside with you and will help out with bedtime, and always again ask for your head staff's help if you need help with getting the kids to sleep. If some of them are staying up, if they're not listening, use people around you, communicate and ask for help, because there's people there that are there to help. Again, this might vary camp to camp. Some camps might have a completely different kind of like bedtime routine, different things. They might follow different schedules and stuff in terms of going to sleep. So something to definitely ask if you're like concerned or you want to know how things worked, or ask other people that have been to that camp before. And another thing, obviously orientation will cover a lot of this anyway. One thing that I really like to do as well when it was kind of like nighttime going to bed is just go around to each camper individually, say goodnight, just chat to them about the day, just have like a little brief like, oh, like, what was one of your favourite things you did today? How did today go? Is anything going on that you want to talk to me about? Just that personal check-in just before they go to bed, I love doing, just in case there was anything going on that I needed to know about or any other counsellors needed to know about, just so that we were kind of aware. But yeah, that's kind of my tips for kind of getting the kids to sleep. That has worked for me personally at camp. And again, something to remember, like you've got so many people to do this with. It's not you putting a group of 14 kids to sleep just by yourself. There's people there that are there to help and to make the whole process so much smoother. But yeah, again, if you have worked at camp and you've got some other tips on how you were able to get your kids to sleep and different things that worked, please leave it down below, because like I said, every camp is so different. Every kid at camp is so different, so things work differently anyway. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.